Sometimes, what is lost will find its way home when the world is covered in white. The wind roared across the northern peaks, carrying with it the sharp sting of snow and the scent of pine dusted with frost. Jack Sullivan stood at the edge of his porch, shoulders hunched beneath the weight of his worn parka, eyes scanning the swirling white beyond the trees. The storm had come without warning, blanketing the valley in a frozen silence that pressed against the bones. His breath fogged in the air, hanging like faint whispers of the past, memories of missions and comrades, victories and losses, each exhalation a reminder of how much had slipped away. Ranger, his loyal German shepherd, had been gone for nearly a year, taken by circumstances Jack had never fully understood, leaving only echoes of paw prints in the snow and the absence of warmth beside him. Then, out of the swirling storm, a dark shape appeared, moving against the white, ears pricked and tail low but certain. Jack's heart skipped. The amber eyes he had dreamed of in restless nights shone through the flurries, bright and knowing. Ranger's paws crunched against the frozen ground, each step deliberate, carrying him closer across the deep drifts, and with every bounding movement, the familiar scent of home and loyalty filled Jack's senses. The collar around Ranger's neck glinted faintly, catching the weak winter light, and Jack noticed a small, frayed ribbon tied to it, a relic of a memory long buried in the back of his mind. The storm seemed to hush around them, as if nature itself paused to witness the reunion, the wind dipping low to cradle the sound of the dog's gentle growl and the soft murmur of Jack's voice calling, "Ranger, is it really you?" His hands trembled as he extended them, the snow clinging to his gloves, frozen crystals sparkling like tiny stars. Ranger halted a few feet away, lifted a paw in what felt like deliberate acknowledgement, eyes scanning Jack with that same unwavering trust and awareness that had guided them through countless trials. The chill gnawed at Jack's face, but a warmth bloomed in his chest, an old ache dissolving into something he hadn't allowed himself to feel for months. The dog's coat, silver and cream, pressed against the wind, shimmered like moonlight on ice, each hair catching the light as Ranger approached, nose twitching, ears flicking to every subtle shift in the air. Jack knelt slowly, mindful of the snow crust underfoot, feeling every heartbeat thrum in the rhythm of the storm, and when Ranger finally closed the distance, he pressed against Jack's side, head resting against his chest, a simple act, yet full of meaning, bridging the months of absence, the silent nights of longing, and the fears that had weighed him down. The world beyond the porch was a blur of white, yet in this pocket, the storm became background, a silent witness to a bond that had never truly been broken. A miracle carved not by grand gestures but by the patient passage of time and the unyielding loyalty of a friend who had returned exactly when he was needed most. Jack brushed the snow from his shoulders and stepped carefully down the narrow path that led from his cabin to the frozen creek beyond, each footfall crunching softly against the fresh powder, the wind carrying the distant groan of ice shifting under its own weight. Ranger trotted beside him, tail low but wagging slightly, ears swiveling to catch every subtle sound, alert yet calm, a living compass through the white wilderness. The trees bent under the weight of the snow, branches creaking and letting go of their frosty burden, sending soft showers of white onto the trail, each flake shimmering briefly in the pale morning light before settling silently on the frozen ground. Jack's eyes followed the line of the creek, tracing the thin ribbon of water barely moving beneath the ice, and he noticed the pattern of footprints in the snow, not his own but small, deliberate marks that hinted at movement through the storm before him. He crouched slightly, scanning the scene, feeling the rhythm of the landscape, the pulse of the wind, and the subtle shift in the air that only a trained ear and the instincts of a man accustomed to danger could detect. Ranger sniffed at a cluster of broken twigs and snow-draped rocks, and his low growl vibrated through the quiet like a signal, not of alarm, but of recognition, guiding Jack forward. The veteran's hand hovered near his coat pocket, brushing against the compass and old map he had carried for years, remnants of journeys that had tested both courage and patience. As they approached a small copse of evergreens, the outline of a structure emerged faintly through the veil of white, half buried and nearly forgotten, its roof weighted by snow and icicles dangling like translucent ornaments. Jack's breath caught at the sight, an intuitive pull telling him that this place held significance beyond the physical, a thread connecting past and present, loss and rediscovery. Ranger paused, paw raised, ears high, amber eyes fixed on a point ahead, urging Jack to notice the faint glimmer of something partially hidden beneath the snow at the edge of the structure. He knelt carefully, clearing the drift to reveal a small, weathered box, its surface etched with initials worn smooth by time and exposure, a tangible echo of history and memory. Jack's fingers traced the carvings, feeling the grooves beneath the winter chill, understanding in that instant that this discovery was more than coincidence, a message or reminder that the bonds he had held dear were resilient, capable of bridging absence and return. Ranger pressed closer, nudging the box with his nose, eyes locked on Jack with quiet insistence, as if to say the meaning of the moment required attention and reflection. The storm raged around them, but inside this bubble of snow-laden trees and frozen silence, a sense of calm settled, a reassurance that the loyalty and persistence that had weathered separation and hardship were now guiding them toward clarity and renewal. Jack rose slowly, cradling the box, and felt the steady warmth of Ranger's body against his leg, a companion through both the storm outside and the storm within, a reminder that life's unexpected returns could carry the weight of miracles. Unspoken yet profoundly understood, a moment of quiet revelation as the sun attempted to pierce the gray clouds above, casting faint shafts of light over the frozen world. Jack lifted the small box carefully, brushing off the remaining snow, and followed Ranger. Deeper into the copse, the crunch of frozen leaves and twigs underfoot punctuating the quiet hum of the blizzard around them. The air was dense with the scent of pine and frost, each inhalation sharp and invigorating, reminding Jack of mornings spent on long missions in places where silence carried meaning and every sound signaled a story. Ranger padded ahead with deliberate steps, ears high, tail swaying slightly, eyes alert to every flicker of movement and shadow between the trees. Jack's fingers traced the edges of the box again, feeling the worn wood under his gloves, the faint ridges of carved initials telling stories he had not yet uncovered, a bridge to someone's past, preserved through time and care. He noticed the way the wind shifted as they moved, gusts funneling between trunks, bending branches into silent arcs, snow spilling in a delicate cascade onto the ground, creating fleeting patterns that reflected the muted light of the overcast sky. Ranger stopped suddenly, nose lowered, sniffing the cold air, then lifted his head and barked softly, a signal Jack had learned to interpret over the years. There was something here to notice, something beyond the ordinary. Jack crouched, following the dog's gaze to a faint outline partially obscured by snow, a pathway that led to a small clearing where the storm seemed to thin, sunlight breaking through clouds and scattered, pale streaks that glinted on the ice and frost. The clearing revealed a modest cabin, its roof laden with snow, smoke curling faintly from a small chimney, a quiet sign of life or at least recent presence, standing resolute against the sweeping storm. Jack's heart quickened, understanding that the cabin might hold connections to the box he carried and perhaps answers to questions that had lingered since Ranger's disappearance. He advanced carefully, Ranger at his side, the dog's gaze unwavering, guiding him with instinct and awareness that seemed almost prescient. Each step brought Jack closer to the sense of a story waiting to unfold, the weight of the past and the hope of discovery pressing lightly against his chest. As they reached the edge of the clearing, Jack knelt to place the box on the snow, its surface cold beneath his fingers, and lifted the lid gently, revealing a folded letter inside, the paper yellowed but legible, ink slightly faded yet still clear, each word a whisper from the past, a connection, a message meant to bridge time and distance, bringing with it the unspoken promise of resolution and understanding. Ranger sat beside him, head tilted slightly, eyes fixed on Jack as if knowing that the significance of this moment required both attention and reflection. The wind carried a low, steady hum through the trees, the storm outside maintaining its rhythm but softened here, in this small sanctuary of discovery, the interplay of snow, light, and sound creating a scene both cinematic and intimate, a world holding its breath as Jack unfolded the letter, the quiet murmur of the dog and the whispering wind merging into a single, compelling chorus of anticipation and revelation, signaling that the journey of loss, loyalty, and the slow return of hope was entering its next chapter. Jack unfolded the yellowed letter carefully, the crisp paper crackling softly in the stillness of the clearing, each word etched in ink that had weathered decades but remained legible, carrying the weight of someone's intent and memory. Ranger shifted beside him, tail low, eyes attentive, ears flicking toward every sound, the subtle movement of snow along the branches, the whisper of wind brushing against the cabin roof, and the faint drip of melting icicles that punctuated the silence like a measured heartbeat. Jack read aloud in a low voice, savoring each syllable as if drawing meaning from the cadence itself, discovering a message of guidance, care, and unexpected foresight from a figure who had once occupied this place, someone who had clearly understood the significance of loyalty and timing, the careful orchestration of events that brought the dog back into his life. The snow around them softened in the pale sunlight filtering through the clouded sky, illuminating frost crystals on branches and the faint traces of wildlife tracks in the drifted powder, each shimmer of light creating a sense of quiet reverence for the moment, a connection to the broader tapestry of time, loss, and restoration. Ranger nudged the letter with his nose, eyes locking on Jack as if insisting he take heed of what was written, a reminder that this was more than just a simple note, but a guide, a call to action, a key to understanding the hidden threads that had brought them to this point. Jack rose slowly, tucking the letter carefully into his coat pocket, feeling the chill of the winter air against his face, the pulse of excitement and contemplation mixing in his chest, and he glanced toward the cabin once more, its structure modest yet holding an aura of significance, a beacon of past purpose waiting to be revealed. He moved forward, boots crunching over the hardened snow, Ranger at his side, alert and steady, ears twitching at each subtle sound, guiding him toward the faint smoke that suggested a fire had been lit recently, a sign that someone had anticipated his arrival or that the place had not been entirely abandoned. As they approached, the scent of burning wood mingled with the crisp winter air, carrying with it a comforting warmth, a hint of hearth and home in the midst of the blizzard, and Jack felt a stir of familiarity, a connection that transcended the months of separation, a reminder that loyalty, patience, and faith could reshape the course of one's life. The cabin door was slightly ajar, the hinges creaking gently with the wind, and inside, shadows shifted across the walls as the pale light filtered through snow-dusted windows, revealing worn wooden floors, shelves lined with old tools and remnants of daily life, and a small hearth where embers still glowed faintly, breathing warmth into the otherwise frigid space. Jack stepped inside cautiously, Ranger following, paws making soft impressions in the thin layer of snow that had drifted inside, the dog pausing to sniff the corners and press against Jack for guidance, a living compass that connected the present with echoes of the past. He placed the letter on the nearest table, brushing the edge of a faded photograph that depicted a figure smiling, hands steady over the workbench, eyes bright with purpose, a moment captured decades earlier but now entwined with the current reality, and Jack sensed a story unfolding, not through words alone, but through the textures, the scents, the light, and the presence of Ranger beside him, the embodiment of resilience and the silent herald of miracles waiting to be recognized and embraced. Jack carefully lifted the faded photograph from the table, brushing away a thin layer of snow that had drifted inside from the slightly ajar door, and held it against the pale light streaming through the window, tracing the outline of a young man with steady hands and a determined gaze. Ranger nudged the edge of the table gently, amber eyes fixed on Jack as if to signal that the story held within these objects was meant to be discovered fully, a bridge connecting loyalty and lost time. Jack set the photograph down and followed Ranger to a small corner of the cabin where a set of worn wooden drawers beckoned with the promise of secrets long forgotten. Each drawer creaked softly as he opened it, revealing layers of papers, journals, and maps, the smell of aged wood and winter air mixing in a scent that carried both memory and anticipation. Ranger sniffed each corner, tail low and sweeping, ears flicking at the slightest sound of snow falling from the eaves or a distant bird hidden among the frost-laden branches, and Jack felt the rhythm of discovery, the pulse of history echoing through the quiet cabin. He unfolded a brittle piece of paper, a map etched with faint lines and annotations, and traced the routes with his fingers, imagining the footsteps that had traversed these paths before, the care and patience invested in marking every detail for a purpose now revealed. The wind outside shifted, bringing with it the distant howl of the storm and the soft clatter of ice against the cabin walls, yet within this small space, the atmosphere felt suspended, almost sacred, as if the room itself was aware of the reunion of man and dog and the unfolding of a story paused for years. Jack leaned against the table, absorbing the textures, the faint warmth of the embers in the hearth, and the steady presence of Ranger at his side, feeling the tension of months of uncertainty dissolve into a calm certainty that they were exactly where they needed to be. He opened another drawer and found a small tin box, lid rusted but intact, inside carefully coiled letters and mementos from someone who had lived and cared in this place, each item a thread in the tapestry of memory, a reminder that attention to kindness, loyalty, and quiet deeds could ripple forward in time, bridging the gaps left by absence and loss. Ranger pawed gently at Jack's knee, nudging him to focus on the next discovery, and Jack followed the dog's guidance to a faded journal resting beneath a stack of papers, opening it to reveal neat handwriting chronicling days of work, thought, and intention, the words conveying a sense of hope, discipline, and unseen planning that now intersected with his own path. The snow outside began to soften, light filtering through the gray sky and touching the cabin in muted beams that reflected across the wooden surfaces, illuminating the textures of age, care, and resilience. Jack read passages aloud, Ranger attentive beside him, ears twitching, tail sweeping gently against the floor, each sound blending with the hum of the storm and the quiet crackle of the dying embers in the hearth, creating a symphony of environment and discovery. As he closed the journal and set it beside the photograph, a sense of clarity and purpose settled over him, the storm and snow outside now framing the cabin as a sanctuary of revelation, a space where the bond between man and dog, the careful preservation of history, and the unfolding miracle of presence and attention converged, signaling that the next chapter of understanding and belonging was ready to begin. Jack stepped closer to the small hearth, brushing snow from his gloves, and felt the faint warmth radiating from the embers, a subtle but steady reminder that life and persistence endure even in the coldest moments. Ranger settled at his side, head resting lightly against Jack's thigh, ears flicking at each whisper of the wind that threaded through the cracks in the cabin walls, the soft hiss of ice melting from the eaves, and the faint creak of the roof under the weight of the storm. Jack picked up a folded map from the table, edges frayed and ink faded, tracing the lines with careful fingers as though the pathways marked upon it could guide not only his steps but his understanding of the unfolding sequence that had led Ranger back to him. Each crease in the paper seemed to hold memories, decisions, and intentions, a silent testimony to those who had walked these paths before and left guidance for those who would come after. The snow outside began to shimmer under the pale light filtering through the gray sky, casting muted reflections across the wooden floor and highlighting the intricate textures of age, care, and patience in the cabin's interior. Jack's eyes followed Ranger as he moved to a corner where a collection of small objects rested, each carefully arranged, telling stories of attention, endurance, and quiet acts of service, and he felt a pulse of understanding, the sense that every detail mattered. Every gesture was part of a larger rhythm, and that the dog had always been the interpreter of this rhythm, the one capable of bridging absence and presence, loss and reunion. He knelt beside Ranger, stroking the dog's thick coat, feeling the warmth beneath the fur and the steady beat of the heart, a rhythm both familiar and grounding, a companion to the breathless anticipation of what might come next. The cabin, the storm outside, and the lingering scent of pine and wood smoke combined into a sensory tapestry that held Jack's attention completely, the environment itself narrating the unfolding of events in whispers, creaks, and subtle shifts of light and shadow. He retrieved the tin box again, carefully lifting each item, noting the handwritten letters, small trinkets, and personal tokens that carried messages of care, foresight, and encouragement, each element a mirror of the trust and loyalty that had brought Ranger back and, through him, had created a space for reflection and growth. The wind shifted again, a gentle gust nudging the cabin door slightly, scattering a few loose snowflakes across the floor and catching the edges of the letters, as if nature itself were participating in the revelation, urging Jack to absorb, understand, and integrate the lessons and stories left behind. Ranger moved to the window, nose lifted, amber eyes scanning the white expanse, alert yet calm, and Jack rose to stand beside him, feeling the connection, the quiet assurance that despite the isolation and the storm, the bond between them, patience, and attention to the small details had guided them here, to a moment of clarity, healing, and renewed purpose. He placed the letters and trinkets back into the box gently, closed it with care, and turned to Ranger, knowing that together they were ready to follow the next path, that the blizzard, the cabin, and the small discoveries were not the end but the threshold of something larger, a continuation of loyalty rewarded, presence honored, and miracles revealed in the quiet persistence of faithful companionship. The sky above the clearing lightened subtly as the storm began to shift, thin streaks of sunlight piercing the gray clouds and scattering across the snow-laden branches, each beam glinting off the frozen surfaces like delicate threads of silver. Jack adjusted his coat, brushing snow from his shoulders, and felt a calm settle over him, the tension from the long search and the months of absence finally easing into a quiet anticipation. Ranger padded forward, tail sweeping low, ears alert, nose twitching as he led Jack toward a subtle path that emerged between the evergreens, the snow compressed under his paws and guiding Jack with an instinctive precision that could not be taught. The cabin behind them receded into the background, its warmth and the discovery of the letters and trinkets lingering in Jack's mind as a reminder that the past was not lost but rather a foundation upon which new understanding could be built. As they moved, Jack noticed the subtle changes in the wind, carrying scents of frost, pine, and the faint tang of melting ice, each inhalation anchoring him in the present and sharpening his awareness of the landscape around him. The path led to a shallow slope overlooking the frozen creek, the ice reflecting the muted light of the morning in a mirror-like sheen, and Jack paused, feeling the weight of the world and the gentle pulse of life beneath the frozen surface, a rhythm that Ranger seemed to sense as well, pacing lightly, nostrils flaring to catch every subtle vibration in the air. He pulled the letter from his coat pocket once more, reading aloud the final lines that spoke of guidance, patience, and the quiet power of presence, each word resonating with him in the stillness, carrying a message that transcended time and circumstance. Ranger pressed close, nudging Jack gently with his head, eyes bright and steady, as if confirming that the path forward was clear and that the bond they shared was the most reliable compass through the uncertainty that had defined the past year. Jack set the letter down on a rock nearby, feeling the texture of its weathered surface against his gloved hands, and looked toward the horizon where the sun began to break more fully through the clouds, casting long, soft shadows across the snow and illuminating the distant treetops in warm tones that contrasted with the icy foreground. The world seemed to pause, every sound amplified, the creak of the branches, the distant rustle of a bird through the treetops, the soft whisper of wind across the snow, and Jack felt a surge of gratitude for the return of Ranger, the fidelity of the dog bridging the months of separation and the quiet ache of longing. He knelt beside Ranger, running a hand over his thick coat, feeling the warmth, the solidity, and the steady breath beneath, sensing that this reunion was not merely a chance occurrence but a culmination of attention, loyalty, and patience rewarded in its own gentle, miraculous way. Together they stood at the edge of the slope, taking in the expanse of white, the faint shimmer of ice, and the subtle glimmers of sunlight filtering through the clouds, understanding that this moment marked both a conclusion and a beginning, a quiet triumph born of steadfast companionship, the patience to endure, and the enduring presence of those who return when most needed, carrying with them the power to heal, guide, and inspire. Jack followed Ranger carefully down the slope toward a small bend in the frozen creek, the air sharp and cold, each inhalation crisp and tinged with pine and frost. The sunlight, diffused through the clouds, painted the snow in pale gold and silver, highlighting the contours of the icy terrain and casting long, soft shadows between the trees. Jack's boots crunched steadily in the deep snow, a rhythmic accompaniment to the muted whisper of wind and the occasional clatter of melting ice from the evergreens above. Ranger paused, ears pricked, amber eyes focused intently on a subtle movement beneath the snow near the creek's edge, a sign that something hidden waited to be revealed. Jack knelt slowly, brushing aside a thin layer of snow to uncover a small, weathered chest, its metal hinges rusted but still intact, the surface etched with symbols and initials that seemed familiar in a way he could not yet place. His fingers traced the worn carvings, feeling the smooth grooves beneath the chill, and he sensed the care and intent poured into creating this repository of memories, a bridge from past to present. Ranger nudged his shoulder gently, tail sweeping, eyes unwavering, a silent insistence that Jack pay attention, that the story held within this chest was a key to understanding the events that had brought them here. He lifted the lid slowly, revealing carefully wrapped papers, small tokens, and trinkets of personal significance, each item preserved against time, dust, and snow, each holding a narrative of hope, guidance, and patient foresight. The wind outside shifted, carrying with it the soft creak of tree branches and the faint sound of ice moving across the creek, harmonizing with the subtle crackle of embers still glowing faintly in the cabin they had left behind. Jack examined each piece with deliberate care, reading fragments of letters, noting the meticulous handwriting and the layered meanings that spoke of intention, loyalty, and quiet acts of kindness that had waited years for the right moment to be discovered. Ranger circled the chest, nose to the ground, ears alert, sensing the significance of the discovery and the weight of time that had preserved it. Jack carefully organized the items, noting the connections between them, the patterns that emerged, and the guidance they offered, each revelation a gentle unfolding of clarity, understanding, and renewed purpose. The snow glistened. Around them, a reflective canvas that mirrored the golden shafts of sunlight breaking fully through the thinning clouds, casting a serene light over the frozen landscape. Jack stood, feeling the warmth of Ranger's presence beside him, the bond between them a quiet, steadfast anchor amidst the snow and ice, and he realized that this moment marked a profound convergence, the return of loyalty, the uncovering of hidden truths, and the promise of a new chapter shaped by patience, faith, and enduring connection. The creek stretched before them, frozen but glimmering with subtle hints of motion beneath the surface, a reminder that beneath the stillness, life persisted, and beneath the layers of time, the seeds of revelation and healing had always been waiting, ready to guide those who were willing to follow, to trust, and to embrace the gentle miracles offered through presence, devotion, and the quiet persistence of a friend returned. Jack stood at the edge of the frozen creek, the small chest of letters and mementos secured in his backpack, the soft sunlight scattering across the snow and highlighting every glint of ice like scattered diamonds. Ranger sat beside him, eyes bright and alert, ears swiveling to catch even the faintest sound, tail sweeping slowly, a living embodiment of the journey that had brought them here. The forest stretched beyond the clearing, silent except for the subtle hiss of melting snow and the distant whisper of the wind threading through the bare branches, carrying with it the crisp scent of frost and pine. Jack inhaled deeply, letting the cold air fill his lungs, and felt the weight of months of waiting and uncertainty lift slightly, replaced with a calm clarity that came from understanding the significance of the path they had traveled together. He took a few steps forward, feeling the crunch of snow under his boots, and looked back at Ranger, whose attentive gaze mirrored his own, the quiet reassurance of presence and loyalty guiding every movement. The creek glimmered under the sunlight, a reflective sheet of ice hinting at the gentle flow beneath, and Jack's eyes traced the subtle patterns, imagining the stories and histories embedded within the frozen surface, connecting past actions with present moments. Ranger nudged him gently with his nose, prompting him to follow a narrow trail leading to a gentle rise where the snow-draped trees opened to a view of the distant mountains, their peaks catching the early light and casting soft shadows across the valley. Jack paused, feeling the expanse of the world around him, the rhythm of life, and the quiet miracle of reunion, the realization that each step, each act of patience, each moment of faith had led to this unfolding clarity. He knelt briefly, resting a hand on Ranger's shoulder, feeling the warmth and steady heartbeat beneath the thick fur, a reminder of the unspoken bond that had endured absence, storms, and solitude. The wind shifted again, scattering a few flakes across the landscape, glinting in the sunlight, and Jack sensed the narrative of loyalty, return, and resolution enveloping them, the moment itself a culmination of careful attention, trust, and persistent hope. The cabin behind them, the chest of memories, and the path they had traversed converged into a quiet symphony of sight, sound, and sensation, each detail reinforcing the importance of being present, noticing, and embracing the unexpected returns that life offered. Jack stood, adjusting his coat, glancing once more at the chest of letters and trinkets safely tucked away, a tangible connection to the story that had unfolded, and then looked out over the valley, sunlight filtering through the thinning clouds, snow reflecting the gentle warmth, knowing that this moment marked both the conclusion of a journey and the opening of new possibilities, a testament to patience rewarded, loyalty honored, and the subtle miracles that occur when one is attentive. steadfast, and ready to embrace the gifts that return after a long absence. Ranger stepped forward beside him, and together they moved slowly down the slope